Thanks for downloading this episode from Teachers Talk Radio. You can find the full schedule and listen back to all our shows at ttradio.org. Enjoy the podcast. Welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us on TTR this evening. An important conversation coming up, and welcome to Teachers Talk Radio. I'm Tom Rogers, and tonight we're going to talk about a topic that's become, I would say, more urgent, let's say, for teachers, for parents, for school leaders across the country, which is the growing influence, if you like, of this thing that we've termed, in inverted commas, the Manosphere, online misogyny, figures like Andrew Tate, and their impact on boys, particularly in our schools and within education. And you know, unless you've been sort of hiding somewhere, you've probably heard of Andrew Tate. But what I guess the last year or two has made many people realise is that is almost like the tip of the iceberg on what's beyond that and what's in that online world and what young people are talking about and what they're engaging with. So the question we're going to ask tonight is what schools should do, how schools should engage with it, how they shouldn't engage with it, how we teach masculinity in school, and that's in the age of algorithms and online extremism and all the rest of it. How do we put across the idea of masculinity? Is that idea debated? In terms of what it should look like? Well, of course it is. We know that, but we're going to sort of unpack that tonight. And this evening I've got multiple guests, and of course I'd like to open it up as well to anybody else who wants to get involved or call in or make a contribution to this. Then absolutely later on, just click the little microphone icon in the bottom left and actually get involved in the conversation and interact with us and call in. We've got Matt Pinkett, we've got Tommy Pastoral here as well, and also Maud Warat is also probably gonna join us too. So we're going to have a number of different people sort of contributing to the conversation this evening. So whether you're a classroom teacher, a head of year, a DSL, somebody involved with this in some capacity in school, form tutor even, then hopefully this is gonna help sort of form some different opinions or points of view or help that you can take away with you for teaching this. And actually, for me personally, I'm looking forward to that as well in my school and being able to sort of take something from this conversation into what I actually do in the classroom, but also as a form tutor. And before we kick off and get started, it would be remiss of me to not mention our sponsors on the show this evening that are Kialo EDU. If you haven't heard of Kialo, that's KIALO Education. It's an amazing platform that allows you to discuss and debate with students in the classroom. It's particularly useful if you've got one-to-one devices. So just check them out at kialo-edu.com. That's KIALO. Have a look. It's free as well. It's free for teachers and for students to use. And our other amazing sponsor is John Catt Educational. So if you are interested in any sort of topic in education, they have an incredible library of books ready for you to get hold of at johncattbookshop.com, and you can explore their full range of titles there. And you can even use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Right, let's get started by just saying hi to our guests. So, Matt, are you there?
Hello, mate. Yeah, I'm here. How you doing?
Oh, brilliant. Good evening to you. Do you want to give a very brief intro, Matt, to yourself, just for people listening who might not know you?
Yeah, of course. So my name's Matt Pinkett. I'm an English teacher. I've been teaching over a decade now, 15 years or so. And when I'm not teaching, I'm writing, speaking, going into schools, and talking to students and staff about masculinity, all sorts of things like attainment, mental health, violence, but probably like 90% of what I do at the moment, because of Andrew Tate and all his mates, is speak to young lads and to teachers about things like misogyny, sexual harassment, and the Manosphere, incel culture. Currently writing a book on that. So yeah, that's me.
Brilliant. Thanks, Matt. And Tommy as well, we've got, who actually sort of inspired this show, because Tommy wrote an article for the TES end of last year that sort of popped up again maybe a week ago. And it sort of made me think again about this topic. And obviously we've had adolescence as well on Netflix, and that's brought it to an even greater audience. So Tommy, you there? If you want to unmute yourself just in the bottom left, hopefully you can. There you go.
Yeah, I'm here.
Amazing. Do you want to introduce yourself really briefly to everyone in terms of what your current role is?
Yeah, so I'm Tommy. I'm a Safeguarding and Welfare Officer, Deputy DSL. Been in education for about 12, 13 years, something like that now, I can't remember. Been in safeguarding for 7 or 8 years, and just really passionate about sort of male mental health, and then that's led to kind of my involvement in this kind of stuff with, you know, the Manosphere and whatnot. So you mentioned that TED article, but I think it was 4 years ago I wrote my for the first time about incels, and it was about 6 months before the Plymouth murders, and was told that I was causing a moral panic and kind of worrying about things that we didn't need to. But obviously in the 4 years since, we've seen it come to the surface a lot more. So I think it is important work, and it's good that we can have these kind of conversations and raise awareness about these kind of things as well.
No, spot on. Matt, I'll come to you first. I just wanted to ask you if you could tell us what first made you feel that this topic needed urgent attention in schools.
Well, that's the question. I think actually before Andrew Tate reared his ugly head, you know, I think when the first book came out, I guess Mark Roberts, who also wrote the book, we kind of became the boy guys, you know, and so originally all of my research started on stuff like classroom stuff, but then you know, you become hypersensitive to masculinity, and I was just hearing just really inappropriate stuff in schools, and just got a little bit tired really of the way that so many, or lots of boys anyway, talk about women. And obviously toxic masculinity became kind of zeitgeist, and obviously misogyny is a huge part of that. So yeah, I spend a lot of time thinking and reading about it now.
Tommy, I wanted to maybe kick off with a question for you. But for teachers who aren't familiar with this phrase, the manosphere, well, first of all, what is that? And second of all, how would you describe the scale of its influence on students? And you need to unmute yourself, Tommy.
So the manosphere is kind of, So the manosphere is kind of an umbrella term really for a somewhat interconnected web of forums, websites, groups, with a lot of different kind of groups and organisations and mindsets that kind of fall under that umbrella. So it's not a literal thing. It's not like a fan club. You're not going to have a look at a kid and they've got, like, you know, a login to the Manosphere. It's not that. It's just kind of a kind of phrase for this. I guess it's this ideology, and as you mentioned, adolescence. You know, there's been a lot of stuff being posted about it, and a lot of people claiming that, oh, you know, the Manosphere doesn't exist, but it is just that term for all of these groups, and there's so many different groups within that are all very different in terms of how they think, how they act, and I guess the danger that they pose as well.
I mean, I wanted to sort of, and feel free both of you to jump in here, but why do you think that certain boys then are sort of drawn into those communities and those messages?
But I think firstly they're targeted. You know, the algorithms are actively targeting and bombarding young boys with misogynistic content. I read of a study fairly recently in which researchers set up a YouTube account in the name of a boy, and I think on average it took 13 minutes before the recommended watches sidebar started recommending misogynistic content. So there is, you know, you know, they're being targeted. You know, they're looking for these people. Also, I
And
think.
what's the, Matt,
Oh,
can I just ask on that, like, what's the end goal then of that, if that makes sense? Because what we're talking about here is the vehicles to get into this thing we've, I guess, termed the Manosphere. But what's the end goal of the Manosphere?
well, well, there are actually a number of niche, disparate communities within the Manosphere.
Yeah.
So, and actually, lots of Manosphere communities kind of disagree with each other.
Yeah.
If we're talking about incels, which is probably the most renowned group
Yeah.
that exists within the Manosphere, well, I guess their aim is to wake people up to the fact that women are superficial. Creatures, to use a word that lots of incels use to refer to women, and make people realise that men are biologically deficient, and that women will manipulate us and toy with us, and basically what incels want to do is to wake people up to that fact.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. So, Tommy, in school, because you're obviously in school, so am I. But I mean, as a classroom teacher, um, I would say my sort of not awareness, but the way I would see this is probably a bit more limited, right? As a history teacher. Okay, so I wanted to ask you, from your role within the safeguarding DSL sort of role, how prevalent do you think this is, and why do you think certain boys are drawn to these messages?
I think it's pretty prevalent, but it for a lot of the kids, I would say it's under the surface, so it's not necessarily showing up in their behaviour, and it's not, you know, sort of glaringly obvious.
Yeah.
A couple of years ago, we had, I think they were year 9, and they had ran like a lunchtime debate, and it was Andrew Tate, like villain or hero, and they'd done this debate, and pretty much the whole year group were there, and kids that were, you know, you'd never had any issues with them, really, really smart, really good kids, and they'd just been completely taken in by it. Like they were just regurgitating all of these talking points.
What sort of, like, give me an example of a talking point? Like, give me
just about the kind of that, I guess what's been called that aspirational misogyny, and the need to you know, look a certain way and have a certain amount of money, and women are only good for this, and women shouldn't do that, and
yeah.
I can't remember the exact comment that a guy come out with, but it was, yeah, it had gone on to something about like sort of sex work, and I was just like, what, like, and the problem is when you actually start kind of digging into it and questioning, that they can't answer it, because all they've got is that little TikTok 2-minute clip to kind of regurgitate. There's no depth to their viewpoint. It's just what they've been bombarded with, as Matt said, with the algorithms. And like I said, not all of them you're gonna see that unless you kind of dig into it and question. But we do see some where it is apparent, like you know, pushing their friends into girls in the corridor, going up to girls to ask them out for a bet, saying numbers as girls walk past because they're rating them out of 10 on certain body parts. Difficulties with female members of staff in terms of their level of respect. So it is showing up, but in kind of different ways depending on the kid.
I mean, Matt, you jump in on this as well, but why are boys, because Tommy's just mentioned quite intelligent kids, so why do you think kids are getting drawn into this? Is there a sort of some reasons there that we can't ignore? Is there some stuff that we can't just say, oh yeah, they're misogynistic or whatever? Is there any sort of qualifier as to why they're getting drawn into this stuff? Or is it just based on silliness, if you know what I mean?
So some of it will be just, it's in vogue. But also I think what's often forgotten, particularly in mainstream media discourse about a lot of the people accessing Manosphere content, is a lot of them have some quite significant mental health issues, and lots of insecurity, in a world where physical attractiveness appears to be everything, particularly for adolescents. For how you look and how you look to people that you are attracted to, or how you look to members of the opposite or even the same sex, is kind of everything. And for lots of young men who are not successful in the school realm of dating and romance, then Manosphere ideologies provide a very useful, very black and white explanation for their lack of romantic or sexual success. It's okay. Well, I've been rejected, or I've been dumped, or I can't get a girlfriend. Everyone else on YouTube, Andrew Tate, he's sleeping with thousands of women every night, and I can't get anyone. Well, that must be because women are shallow, or that must be because 80% of women are only attracted to 20% of men. A lot of these boys feel lonely, they feel confused, they feel frustrated, they feel isolated, and the Manosphere gives them a narrative, a convenient narrative.
And I guess like a sense of community as well, maybe a sense of meaning.
Yeah, I mean, it's very strange because it's lots of, when I do my research and go on incel forums, there's a lot of infighting between incels, for example. I saw a tweet fairly recently in which a young lad expressed a wish to die by suicide, and for every comment that said, look, you're too young to be an incel, just give it time, you might be able to improve your dating and all the rest of it, for every comment like that, there was 10 more giving him advice on how he can kill himself. So it's yes, a community, but a very fractious community.
Yeah. Tommy, you in the safeguarding sort of deputy DSL sort of arena, what are some of the early warning signs for you where you might sort of think that a student was engaging with the content, and also how do you like distinguish between a kid who's just trying to be maybe a little bit different, a little bit edgy, a little bit provocative, versus someone who's actually getting involved in these sort of belief systems?
I think with the nature of social media, a large percent are engaging with it just purely because it's going to come up on their algorithms. How much attention they pay it is another matter. And like you said, some kids are just going to say stuff for the, for the dramatic effect and for the laugh. But I think part of that is where I said, digging into the conversation and giving them a chance to talk. And this is where that kind of call in, don't call out kind of thing comes in, because if someone says something, you know, really out of pocket and really misogynistic and violent, you just go down, okay, that's out of order. There's your detention, there's your suspension,
Yeah,
whatever,
sure.
and leave it at that. Then you're not really getting anywhere. If you have that chance to, okay, here's your platform, talk to me, let me hear your viewpoint, let me tell you mine. For someone that's just kind of looking for a response, it's going to be quite a shallow argument. They're not going to really have much. Whereas I think those that are kind of a little bit more entrenched, that are paying it a little bit more attention, they're going to be a bit more steadfast in that argument, a bit more rigid in that thinking, and not really want to come round to your viewpoint.
Yeah. I mean, is there a danger that by schools sort of talking about this more, doing assemblies on this, creating, in inverted commas, an open dialogue, and sort of talking about it a lot, is there that risk of like normalizing it or making it more attractive because it's going against the authority, if that makes sense? Like it's becoming
sort of. I mean, that's my key issue with the kind of attention that adolescence is getting, and they're talking about it in Parliament, and there's calls to show it in schools. For me, that's just completely unnecessary. Like, it's, what are you going to show all 4 episodes? It's 4 hours long. Like, when are you going to do that? A lot of the kids are probably going to be bored. It's really long bits of dialogue. It's just not necessary. And a lot of schools went for the kind of knee-jerk response with the rise of Andrew Tate, and we're doing assemblies. And if you went on TikTok at the time, it was just full of kids filming the assemblies, or, you know, recording the sound of assemblies, of their teachers just berating Andrew Tate, saying, you know, you don't need to listen to him, blah, 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 blah. And I found it hilarious. And it just played into, the hands, because we're part of the matrix, aren't we? So, you know, it's just not the right tactic. So yeah, going and doing assemblies, I don't think, because there's not that follow up. You need to have that safe space to actually have that conversation and have that dialogue. Just doing a 15-minute assembly telling everybody that they're wrong isn't really going to have the impact that you want.
Yeah, Matt, I wondered if you have views on that in terms of that side of things, like what things that you think schools are getting wrong with this at the moment. Is it, you know, because it is a massive on-trend issue. I personally think there's always a danger when something gets more mainstream, if you like, that there's suddenly a big clamour to sort of talk about it more, to do more assemblies, to always be sort of referring to it, to use, you know, words and phrases all the time, to talk about someone like Andrew Tate all the time. Is this like, what would you, is that positive, or would you say, like, where would you sit in terms of the dangers on that for school?
Yeah, it's nuanced. I think I'm quite happy to talk to students about Andrew Tate, given how ubiquitous and kind of mainstream he is. Things like incel culture, however, that's an entirely new world. You know, that with some very dark content, and I'd be very reluctant to talk openly about inceldom to students.
Yeah.
In terms of, is it a mistake to talk about it? No, I echo what Tommy says, though. People like Andrew Tate and other Manosphere figures are telling young lads that society doesn't care what they think, that masculinity is outdated, that people don't care what men think and what men have to say. And so any period of instruction, and I do think assemblies can be effective if done the right way, but they do need to be followed up with, you know, you need to set aside time to discuss the issue. When I gave a series of assemblies at my own school, every lunchtime the next day was put aside for kids who were in that assembly hall to come and discuss the issues I raised. And, you know, we had some really interesting conversations. It's really important that we give boys the chance to discuss these things. Otherwise, we're just reinforcing what Manosphere figures are saying, that nobody wants to listen to them. So
Yeah.
yeah, I do think I do think it's important in terms of what are schools getting wrong. You know, I do. There's a lot of discourse, particularly around incels being like a kind of a terrorist threat, a violent threat. Now, undeniably, when an incel does decide to become violent, and we see things like what happened in Plymouth or Elliot Rodger over in the States, it can be devastating. But in actual fact, uh, incidences of incel violence are relatively small. And I think that perhaps our tendency, quite a natural, understandable tendency to villainize incels or villainize people who are engaging in that content, particularly when we're talking about young children, can detract from the fact that actually what a lot of these boys need is our support. And I know that's a controversial thing to say. I'm not saying that they shouldn't be punished. Any kind of hate speech or any kind of misogyny needs to be dealt with. But I really do think schools need to recognise that actually, when you look at the profile, for example, of what an incel is, they're often very, very depressed. A study of US and UK incels found that I think it was 18% of incels have thought about suicide every day for the past 2 weeks. And you compare that to the actual population, which is about 1% have suicidal thought every month. So there are issues that we need to be aware of in relation to mental health.
Yeah, no, spot on. I think Maud has called in. Maud, good evening to you, hopefully, if you can unmute yourself in the bottom left. We'll come back to Maud. Oh, hello,
Yeah.
good evening.
Hello,
You okay?
sorry.
Yeah, it's all right. Maud,
Yeah.
you teach MFL in a school, don't you, still?
Yes, I do.
I was wondering if you have sort of a view on this in terms of whether you think that this manosphere, in inverted commas, is how big an issue do you think it is with students? How's that manifesting itself in the classroom? And, you know, what are your thoughts on what schools or teachers should be doing about it?
Well, I wanted to start by saying it's really tricky to broach the subject with teenagers because, I mean, if you look at the staff, it's 70%, more than 70% of staff are female staff in the UK. So we are in a difficult position. Obviously, if you want to have a feminist take on the issue, you might get ridiculed, or you might get pupils who are argumentative, or just trying to contest what you're saying.
I don't know if that's Maud or me whose signal's gone, but we'll come back to Maud in a minute. Tommy, I just wanted to ask you next about the role of PSHE or RSE and where you think the curriculum might play a role in tackling those issues.
Yeah, I think it's really important because, like I said, it's having those spaces to have those vulnerable conversations about these things. My only worry is a lot of schools, PSHE isn't, it's not a standalone subject. It might just be mainly done in form time, so you're relying on giving this quite big responsibility, these really difficult, delicate conversations to a form tutor that isn't really comfortable having them. So that's a wider point around, PSHE should be carried out by specialist PSHE teachers and have timetabled lessons, but that's another discussion. But that's where you can have these discussions and have those kind of sensitive conversations. And as Matt said, these kids are being told that nobody cares and nobody wants to listen to them. So that's where we need to be listening to them.
I mean, do you think the curriculum currently is falling short? I mean, Matt, feel free to jump in on this as well. Do you think it needs looking at again with specific focus on this?
Just to jump in, I think I heard somebody talking today about it's what's it called? Is it sex and relationships education?
Yeah.
I wonder how much is actually done on the relationships part, and talking to young people, particularly as they get older, about dating etiquette, how to approach somebody that you find attractive in a respectful manner, how to sustain stable relationships, how to deal with rejection. I think that I think there could probably be a bit more work done on that. I also think that there does need to be a more rigid or a more focused instruction on kind of gender, actually, and gender as a construct, and what it means to be female and male in the media world in which we live. I do think that most of the problems, most misogyny comes from boys who are just not comfortable in themselves, and what they start to do is validate themselves only in terms of the female attention they receive. And if they don't receive that female attention, then the fallout can be pretty devastating. They can react pretty badly. So there does need to be some work done. And, some people might argue it's not a teacher's job, but to really get kids just really comfortable with who they are, and to validate themselves for who they are, rather than seeking external validation. I mean, I'm nearly 40 and I still haven't cracked it. So, but maybe that's where we need to focus our efforts.
Well, it is an interesting point you make about dating and sort of that respect, because obviously I'm 40 now, so in my sort of university, early 20s, through maybe to really my late 20s, dating was sort of, the online dating world hadn't really kicked off at that point in a major way, particularly when I was at uni. It was nightclubs. It was bars, nightclubs. It was sort of meeting people through friends and friends of friends, and it was like all that stuff. And the online world has probably, well, of course it's changed dating, but maybe it's also changed, it's maybe just made, and it must be more acute for young people in that they don't necessarily, like you've just said, I think it's a important point, is like know how to date. But they do, but the bit before the dating bit, like the bit of sort of talking to someone, approaching someone, just being confident enough or whatever. I mean, that's always been an issue. Like even in the night, that issue has always been there, since the dawn of time, pretty much. And that's why a lot of guys drink, on a night out or whatever. But also, I guess there's also that element of, do boys now feel a bit sort of more, I don't know, like insecure about what to say and how to go about that and all that stuff? Being honest, I don't know.
Yeah, I'd agree with you. I don't know what Tommy thinks.
Yeah, I definitely think there's that worry of saying the wrong thing, doing the wrong thing. Am I going to be embarrassed? Because their whole lives are online.
Yeah.
So the thought of actually going up and sparking a conversation in person is quite alien to a lot of them. And the whole, that conversation around how to have a healthy relationship, how to date. I know from some of the amazing PSHE work that's done in our school, they really don't understand what a healthy relationship looks like. And especially with, what do you call, like the pornification of relationships now, for boys and for girls especially, there's just a real, quite dangerous misunderstanding of what normal, what would be deemed as a red flag. It's actually quite worrying. And they have so many different classes of, you're not just, you kind of referenced 20 odd years ago, you used to just ask someone out and then that was it. You were going out. Whereas now there's like 20 classifications. It's like a talking stage, then it's something else, then it's something else, and then finally you get to actually being in a relationship. And it, what's kind of normal now is, sharing locations with each other, sharing social media passwords. It's seen as just completely normal, which is quite worrying.
Yeah. Debbie, I think you've called in if you want to say something.
Yeah, I do. I worked in a school with teenagers, girls and boys, and there was an incident of a teenage lad, must have been 13, and a girl, 13, where he was walking behind her and he placed a plastic cup on her head, and obviously when she looked round, he was like looking at the ceiling and things like that. Now, to me, that was him trying to actually, get attention from the girl, if you like, in like a 7-year-old's mind. I think that's how they used to do, pull the pigtails, all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
He was then reprimanded for sexual harassment for that incident.
Okay.
And
Okay.
I find that people, schools, parents have lost all of that information of thinking and looking at the teenager and just speaking to them. Because a lot of them have not got those skills. And like you said, PSHE, is once every fortnight, an hour. I mean, that's not. They should be like life skills for this, especially with the boys' schools.
Matt or Tommy, any sort of comment on that sort of point, wider point? I mean, obviously, just to say we don't know the context of that, the full context, so we don't know sort of whether that was a one-off incident or whatever. We don't know from that story. Just to be clear on that. Okay.
No,
Okay.
yes, it was, because I had to investigate it.
Okay.
Matt, being the behaviour.
Any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think if schools were a little bit clearer on exactly what constitutes sexual harassment according to the guidelines, we wouldn't have these sort of issues. I still, I think in most schools, kids and actually even the teachers don't know exactly what constitutes sexual harassment. I could ask the question now: do the Department for Education in keeping children safe in education, do they state that wolf whistling is a sexual harassment behaviour? Now, if you all think, the actual answer is no, they don't. But most teachers would say yes, it is. It should be. But the point I'm making is that schools are absolutely nobody knows. Nobody knows what sexual harassment looks like, when all we have to do is let the kids know, let the teachers know, and let the parents know. And I honestly think that would have a transformative effect on reducing incidences of sexual harassment. A lot of kids committing sexual harassment and not realizing that what they're doing is sexual harassment. We need to be a lot more direct, a lot more explicit, and a lot more open about making it clear to all stakeholders what it looks like, why it's wrong, and what you're going to do about it when it happens.
But I think also the PSHE that they have in schools has got to be relooked at what they're teaching them. You know, some of these teenagers, and I'm in my 60s, so some of these teenagers knew stuff about sex and everything and that even I didn't know at 60. And you know, I think the whole curriculum around that needs to be changed and looked at in that sense that it needs to be about the relationships and, building up their self esteem as well. And I think this is where this incel thing comes from because they haven't got that um, self esteem to build up in any place. Youth clubs used to be a really good place back in my day where we used to meet lads and chat and everything and have common ground. But I don't know. I don't know. It's a real dangerous world, I think, for teenagers online. Real
Mm.
dangerous world.
Debbie, thanks so much for calling in. It's a really good contribution, which we'll continue to reflect on in the course of this conversation. That was great. Listen, if anybody else wants to call in as well, then obviously feel free to do that, and we'll try to get to you in the course of the next sort of 20 minutes or so. What I'd like to move on to in a minute, Matt and Tommy, is around what the schools who are doing a good job with this stuff are doing. So, if you like, best practice in this area, I guess, and how some schools are taking like a proactive approach maybe to this, and what they're actually doing to do that, and and thinking about the teaching of masculinity as well in particular. Just before we sort of segue into that, be a good opportunity for me once again to shout out to our sponsors on the show this evening, that are Kialo EDU and John Catt Educational. If you want to find out more about Kialo, which is an award-winning free discussion and debate platform, it'd be great for some of the issues we're actually discussing tonight, then go to kialo-edu.com. It's completely free for teachers and students to use. I tested it 2 weeks ago in my class. It was really, really good. It's kialo-edu.com. And our other sponsor is John Catt Educational, who are leading publishers of professional development books and resources. If you want to find out more about them, you can visit johncattbookshop.com and you can explore the full range of titles on the website. So, Matt, I'll start with you on this then. What are schools, do you think, doing as individual entities that you think is best practice in this area of sort of preventing this manosphere culture taking hold?
I think what good practice looks like is being really clear with the students about how you're going to deal with sexual harassment. We know that 86% of girls who are sexually harassed in British secondary schools do not report it for fear of judgment or that the school won't handle it correctly. So I think there needs to be really explicit communication from teachers that any allegation of sexual harassment will be treated seriously and with sensitivity and compassion. Um, I think that the other thing that good schools do is come down hard on pupil to staff sexual harassment. There are far too many female members of staff being routinely subjected to sexual harassment or sexualized comments every day. And that's brilliant. And also, I just think, a real proactive approach,
Yeah.
we've got to make our boys and our girls, of course, feel empowered and feel good about themselves. I do know of a few schools who have tried to implement a sexual harassment policy to go on their website, which I thought was a good idea. In both those cases, the head teacher was blocked from doing so by the Multi Academy Trust, of which they're a part, because senior executives were worried that it would draw too much negative attention to the trust by creating a sexual harassment policy, which is a shame.
Yeah.
I really think that, again, that could be transformative. And as Tommy said earlier, I think, schools with really solid PSHE curriculums, and as Tommy said earlier, schools where teachers are willing and have the time to discuss these issues with boys, and really listen to them, because it's only when we listen to the boys can we realise, or are we able to start to maybe break down their negative ways of thinking, and reframe their mindsets to a more positive one.
Yeah, I mean, Tommy, I know you mentioned in the article you wrote about this idea of call in, not call out. So I'm presuming that for you is part of this best practice in schools. So do you want to just tell us a bit about that in a maybe a real classroom situation, how you see that playing out?
Yeah, so it's obviously, I kind of touched on it earlier, but if Matt mentioned, there's a lot of instances of student to teacher sexual harassment and sexualized comments and stuff. So obviously that needs to be handled there and then with in line with the behaviour policy. But again, it's that thing of not just ending it there and actually bringing that student in and trying to discuss the why and being curious about the behaviour and what's underneath it. Which again, kind of Matt said earlier, it can get difficult. It's some people kind of don't want that, and I dare say, you don't want to mention about relationships on Twitter sometimes because you can get hounded. But it's part of that. It's putting that trust in the student and showing that you're willing to listen and listen to their point, so that you can show them a different way and make them see that, okay, this is completely out of order. Just giving them a detention or a 1-day suspension and a day at home probably isn't going to drive that point to them. So instead of calling out the behaviour and just saying that it's reprehensible, it's bringing them in and actually trying to get to the bottom of it and trying to change that behaviour rather than just disciplining the behaviour and leaving it there.
Yeah, I want to sort of dig into this idea of teaching masculinity and what masculinity is a little bit. So, Matt, I mean, it was mentioned earlier. I think it was Tommy who mentioned it actually, around this idea that influences within this manosphere space talk about, but they talk. So when we were saying earlier about it's about being really rich, having loads of girlfriends, being really like super ripped, and being really sort of bold in everything you do. But there'll be others who would sit there and say, okay, that's actually translated as discipline, strength, financial success, leadership. And there'll be many out there going, okay, are these qualities we associate with traditional masculinity? And therefore, is there an overreaction, or is there a miss sort of I don't know, labeling of these things as negative?
Yeah, I mean, I take issue with the idea that strength, discipline, and working hard are purely masculine concepts. Some of the strongest, most disciplined people I know are female. So I think there's work to be done in deconstructing that idea with young people.
But they are ideas associated, whether women have those traits or not. They are ideas that in the past have been strongly associated with traditional masculinity.
Yeah.
And I'm just making the point that, well, I'm not making the point. I've seen many, many others make the point that these things are not negative things, but they're being framed maybe by these influences in a negative way.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, they are positive traits. I think. To be honest, I used to say to kids myself, I used to say, well, I can see why some of you look up to, say, Andrew Tate. He looks after his body, he trains hard, he advocates He talks often about hard work. And the kind of things I talk about is the need to work hard. But I've since come to the realization, like, yeah, he works hard, but what is he working hard at? And it doesn't matter about the good you can see in him, maybe, or any of these influencers. All of that is up the spout the moment that they are denigrating women. So Andrew Tate could be the most disciplined, hardworking, athletic man in the world. But the moment he starts saying it's okay to hit women in the face with a machete, he undoes all of that. And also, what I would also say about a lot of these influencers, so much of, how happy are they really? How happy is Andrew Tate, despite all his hard work, his athleticism, and his discipline? How happy is he really? What's his end point? Where's Andrew Tate going to with, and I'd say that about lots of these influencers, particularly some of the pickup artists who are teaching young boys how they can, sleep with lots of women. Is that happiness? And okay, they're putting the work in and they're working hard and they're working on themselves and they're looking great, but all of it is so superficial. So ideas about traditional masculinity are fine if they're getting you to an end point where you are having a positive impact on the world and you are happy in yourself. But the fact is, a lot of these people, I can't see any genuine signs of happiness. I see anger, I see resentment, I see bravado, but do I ever see genuine happiness beyond just being a smug so and so? I don't have to remember what time it was. The answer is no, I can't. So. And I think that's a good conversation to have with those with boys and young people. It's like, what does happiness look like to you? What do you want from your world?
Because I know Gareth Southgate was talking about this, wasn't he, the other day?
Yeah.
And he was talking about like role models, but it's interesting. I mean, do you have anyone in mind where you think because quite often there needs to be a viable alternative role model, doesn't there? Saying, oh, Gareth Southgate is a viable alternative role model. I'm sorry, a lot of kids just aren't going to see that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's not to say there aren't other viable alternatives, but they're just not gonna. They're not gonna look at for right or wrong. That teenage boys aren't necessarily going to look at Gareth Southgate and say, "Oh, I'm going to be more sort of drawn to you than someone like an Andrew Tate." But obviously, there are other examples out there, aren't there? I could imagine someone like Ashley Walters, for example, would be, somebody who maybe, an alternative. But I just wondered what you thought. Whether you would say in these sort of contexts, well, rather than sort of going towards these influencers or this influencer, could you have a look at this influencer or these influencers? Or whether you think that's just getting into the trap of getting them more into that online world way of thinking.
Sorry. So the question is, do you
The question is, do you think that we should be actually pinpointing and referencing alternative influences? Because in my opinion is we should. My opinion actually is we should. Now that's not to say that other men might be perfect because no one is, and also you could point them in a direction that you think is positive, but as an alternative, but actually that person is undoubtedly going to have their own flaws. Particularly because the way I look at it is you want somebody who almost has some of the same, like you've just mentioned, the not positive, but you've mentioned the characteristics that someone like an Andrew Tate has, like that athleticism and all that sort of stuff and the discipline, but without that misogyny or whatever it is that he's doing. So it's almost trying to find that alternative that the kids will go, oh yeah, they're similar, but they're you know, but obviously as an adult we know that maybe the messaging is different. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I mean, I think that the moment teachers and parents start recommending role models to kids, we're on a hiding to nothing. The moment we
Yeah.
say this is who,
Yeah.
what I tend to do in and around the school is draw attention to the boys themselves when they exhibit something that impresses me.
Yeah.
I was in class the other day, and one of my students was a bit quiet, and I just heard another boy who, they're not in the same social group. I just overheard him say, "Oh, I noticed you're a bit quiet today. Are you all right?" And I kept him behind I kept him behind at the end and told him I thought that was a really impressive, kind of inspiring thing to do, just checking on somebody. But and I think that there are role models and there are positive examples of masculinity around us all of the time. We just got to get better at spotting it and celebrating it when it happens. And also, of course, let's not forget that it doesn't have to be men. Boys don't necessarily. People always talk about boys needing male role models, um, which is founded on the assumption that just by virtue of having a penis between your legs, you're going to have a positive impact on a child. Some of the most troubled kids, and actually people my own age I know, are the way they are because of a negative male role model. And so, we've got to celebrate the role models around us, male or female or otherwise, and
Yeah.
it
No,
is tough.
that's a good point.
It's a tough one. Like essentially what kids want is they want someone that's like a bit cheeky, a bit naughty, a bit, someone that's cool. You can't have a
Yeah.
wholesome,
Well,
wholesome.
this is what I meant about the whole Gareth Southgate thing. You know what I mean?
He's just ttoo wholesome, isn't he? You need someone with an edge.
This is what I mean. This is exactly what I mean. So even though I agree with you, maybe necessarily naming isn't like the best way to go, but I do think that, and also I completely agree with everything you said. But I guess the issue is that, or the issue that's being reported is that young boys are looking for that masculinity, if you see what I mean, which they're going to try and find in men that they can see. I mean, there's a lot within football or within sport, isn't there? There's a lot, maybe there's people, individuals within that sort of arena and stuff. But yeah, it's a tricky one. It's a tricky one, because, like you just pointed out, it needs to be someone in inverted commas who is sound, who is in inverted commas all right, who's in inverted commas cool, whatever word you want to use.
Yeah.
It can't be like that's cringe. It can't be. And quite often, as you say, the sort of squeaky clean individuals who never seem to put a foot wrong, they're not going to necessarily appeal, are they?
No.
Well, they might. No. They might for some kids, but but a lot of kids, they're not. They wouldn't have for me anyway. When I was a teenager, it wouldn't have for me.
But I think that sorry to jump in. I think that's why there's been a lot of talk about, like, the pushing the role models, but it's values that we should be kind of pushing more, and that can be in anybody. And I think that's why it's important. And I have to go on myself to do a lot of this kind of stuff, and working on myself, and put myself through therapy a few years ago to not be a hypocrite, and to practice what I preach, and
it's not about being
be
perfect,
very open about that.
It's not about being perfect. It's not even about being
exactly
right.
And that's part of the problem with
no one at any point in their life. Well, I mean, even people who've been through therapy. I've had session therapy. You've had session therapy. I'm not going to speak for Matt, but loads and loads of people have, right? But the issue, no one's ever in a place. Well, maybe somebody does get to an absolute equilibrium where they're just like feng shui all the way, right? And everything's just completely great. But most people are flawed. Most people are not sort of 100% right at any given time. Maybe they're better, but I think it's about just trying your best, isn't it? And just
Yeah, absolutely.
as a guy.
And I think modelling, and especially in school for male staff in school, is modelling those, you know, sort of positive male relationships. And it doesn't have to be, you know, all showy and in the face, but just in the way that they are, in the way that they interact with others and with other male colleagues, and just basically showing them that it is okay to not, you know, you don't have to be this hyper masculine kind of thing, because it is lonely. Being a boy and stuck in that masculine kind of hyper masculine mindset is lonely. And I spoke to some sixth form students last week, and I said to the girls, you know, if it's one of the girls' birthday, how many of you are getting a birthday card? All the hands go up. I said to the lads, how many of you are going to buy your mate a birthday card? Not a single one. You rarely would even get a happy birthday, especially when I was at school. You get birthday beatings, but you wouldn't get a proper happy birthday. And then as you get older, you might get, you know, they'll buy you a pint, but that's about as emotional and attached as it gets. So it's just showing that it is okay to actually have emotions, to actually have relationships, and modelling that. And those role models need to be in their everyday lives rather than some,
I mean, I think for me,
celebrity.
I've always been too open. I've always been really vulnerable in everything I've done, even as a teenager, as a kid. But as I've gone on, I've always sort of, you know, sort of had, and I guess the positive aspect of that for me has been I've sort of the really good mates and friends I've got now are more similar to that, if that makes sense. Like they're more similar to that, because obviously if you're like that, you then maybe warm towards those people more. So probably the best friends I've got are more similar to that, who are men. And but yeah, in terms of like, it's what's in sort of inside the average guy, like that sort of, you know, there's a lot of sort of instincts there that are difficult, I guess, to manage, and you know, can lead to mistakes. You know, you think about, I don't know, fights or whatever different element you want to pick, there's probably some internal battles going on. So again, it's like being kind to yourself in it and saying, I'm not a bad person, because and that's, I think that links into what we were saying about what happens in schools, in classrooms, in terms of you can't be sort of making a 16-year-old boy feel bad about instincts that they've got that are almost built into them, that they need to find a way to express in a better way, or they just need to talk about. But actually, the instinct itself is almost built into them. So, you know, it's and that's where you've got that danger of, you shouldn't be like that, or you shouldn't do that, you shouldn't think that way. Yeah, absolutely, because they're probably expressing it in a very unhealthy way. But do you see where I'm going with it? I don't know. I'm
definitely.
just literally rambling
that's where that
I'm rambling on a monologue, but I think I know where I'm going with it.
Yeah, that's where that curiosity comes in, and that's where having those, you know, vulnerable conversations, that's where the impact is. Because, you know, for a lot of boys, a lot of men, we've been socialized to think a certain way, to act a certain way. I'm 36 and I can't cry. I literally cannot cry because of how I was brought up, and the repercussions of, if I cried, what would happen. So I can get, you know, if you need to sneeze and it kind of doesn't come through and then it disappears.
Yeah.
That's
Mate,
what
Tommy,
that's what
you're
crying's
lucky, mate,
like
because
for
I'm
me.
crying all the time. Like, I don't know. I'm like,
I said the kids that come and see me at school more than make up for it. So I'm
no, but I take your point.
crying through them.
Take your point.
But
It's that
you know,
repression, in it.
so we do have to have that. Like I say, you know, if they do something awful, then absolutely that needs to be followed through, and that needs to be dealt with in the appropriate way. but we've also got to help them as well, and have that curiosity. And
I mean, again, it depends why they've done it.
Pull them out of that.
It completely depends on the individual, the context, and all the rest of it. But it also depends on the severity of it. Like, there's never an excuse to be violent. There's never an excuse to be sort of physically abusive towards. So there's just never an excuse, in my opinion, right? But obviously, some of the sort of ideas, like I said, there's stuff in there that's almost instincts that are in there, and enough conflicts that are in there, that, you know, and flaws that are in there, that are in every human being, to be fair. And that's what's maybe drawn some of them to this really unhealthy, in inverted commas, manosphere in the first place, because they almost say, oh yeah, we accept that, but also we're gonna sort of maybe preach something to you that's unhealthy on the back of it. But actually what they need is, yes, we accept that, but here's, you know, but this is what you need to do, and this isn't the way forward. Do you know what I mean? There's two avenues there to take. And then you've got a third, which is, no, we reject what you're saying. It's terrible. We're judging you as a bad human being the moment you open your mouth, not addressing necessarily just the behavior, but we're actually saying you're a bad human being. You're a Tate follower or whatever you are, and that's who you are. That's your identity, and you can't. You know, you're terrible for what you said. Blah blah blah. Right? And that's. I mean, it's the same with any behavior in a classroom, in my opinion. Like, you need to address the behavior and not the person. Say, you know, I like you as a person, but the behavior you've just exhibited is really bad, and it's not got a place here, etc. And you can transplant that into this scenario of the whole, you know, somebody says something that's misogynistic or perceived to be misogynistic, whatever, and then it's almost like stopping that jumping on it, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, and it's that careful conversation and trying to get them to see that these influencers don't actually care about them, that they don't have their best interests at heart, and they are actually exploiting them, because it's a massive grift at the end of the day. Like, they all make a lot of money out of it,
sure.
And it's trying to get them to see that that's actually not the path to happiness and being content and being happy in who you are. And actually there is another way, and you can still have those, you know, it's not saying that masculinity is bad and being a man is bad, and you can still have, and, you know, that's what I talk about. Like, you know, I'll go and play football in the week, and I'm from a very working class background, and I could be as manly as anybody, but then my role is incredibly a caring role, a nurturing role. I spend all day sat listening to kids, you know, dumping all their troubles on me. So you don't have to be pigeonholed into one kind of way of thinking and one way of behaving.
No,
and actually, in terms of strength, it's not just the physical strength, but, you know, having that mental strength to question those things and question yourself, and, you know, go through all of that. That's where the strength lies.
Which is less likely you're going to do when you're 15 anyway. I mean, when you're 15, you don't really know what you're doing. Like, you don't know what you're doing. Like, well, maybe to be fair, a lot of the kids I teach now, they do know what they're doing. But I didn't know. I didn't have a clue when I was 14, 15. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. If I'd have been in the online world, I do think I would have been influenced by different things. And that's the difficulty in it, because I didn't grow up in that world, so I have no conception of what it's like to have all those messages being bombarded on you all day, every day, like literally all day, every day, unless your school bans your phone or whatever, right? But in the evening, I'll stay up till 1 o'clock just watching videos with these messages in. Like, a lot of them will be influenced by, like, I would have been influenced by that. Like, I would like to think my parents were quite strict, so they would have probably said, no, you know, you gotta go. Like, they would have maybe latched onto that a little bit, but who knows, because they didn't grow up in that world either.
Yeah, and it's hard not to be, and you could still have strict parents, but they think that, okay, he's just in his room on his phone, so he's all
this
right.
is what I mean. Yeah.
You know, he's not out on the streets and getting drunk over the park. You know, he's a good lad and he's just on his phone. So what harm can it do?
Sure.
And that's part of the worry as well. And in terms of, you know, parents and actually connecting with their kids and knowing what they're doing and spending time with them rather than, you know, sticking a device in their hand and just letting them go nuts.
Yeah,
and
sure.
We've done a very good job over the last few years of, you know, protecting kids physically in the open world, but then just given an open invitation to every stranger in the world to enter their bedroom through their phone.
A final question, guys, because we've sort of run out of time now. So a final question for both of you, and thank you so much for your contributions. Is there anything you wish that more educators understood about this issue of the manosphere and the various tracts of it? Matt, I don't know if you want to sort of kick off with that final question, final thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just educators, really. It's anybody who is engaging with the topic as it's being discussed in the mainstream media. And I think we really need to move away from this caricature of incels as a group of kind of like either they're presented as figures of fun, which I think is problematic in itself. You know, they're the objects of scorn and derision, or and also this idea that all incels are these kind of openly violent sexual deviants. Of course, there are some that will be like that, but a lot of them, I think, are quite mentally ill. Certainly, that's what the research is bearing out. And I do think that certainly in a profession where our job is to look after kids, I think that seeing the boys who are seduced by the manosphere as victims, in the same way that we also tend to view them as perpetrators, could be quite useful in reducing any negative impact that their early forays into the manosphere might have later on in life. So yeah, I think we need to look at the more nuanced picture. And
that makes sense.
So yeah.
That makes sense. And Tommy, any final thoughts on this in terms of what you think educators should know at this point?
I think it's pretty much the same as what Matt said. I think it's good to have an awareness, and obviously I've got a workshop of sorts I've shared with a lot of schools now that kind of just goes through these different groups and what to do. So I'm not going to say don't have an awareness of them, but also, especially with this Netflix program, we're running the risk of a sort of moral panic territory. And when that happens, mistakes happen. So I've seen quite a few things going around Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn about like the emojis and stuff that were referenced that I'm not sure are actually legit from the time I've spent on incel forums and stuff. I don't know if Matt's seen the same, but
so glad you said
I've
that.
not seen a lot of them. I've not seen pretty much any of them really, and I don't know if it was creative license or people just jumping on the bandwagon to try and get their stuff going viral. But we do run the risk of sort of moral panic territory and getting things wrong.
What do you mean by the emoji thing? Sorry, because I'll be honest, I haven't seen adolescence yet. So
okay, so there's kind of some emojis that are referenced in terms of kind of incel language and phrases and ideology, and then there's quite a few posts that are popping up with a lot more and what they supposedly mean and represent. But I've not seen them used anywhere. And I know I can't remember the guy's name, but there's somebody else that I saw on LinkedIn that I spent a lot of time kind of researching this stuff and works in radicalisation and stuff and hasn't seen it either. So
I echo that.
Yeah.
I've seen all over LinkedIn people posting about all these emojis and creating a guide for teachers, but I've not seen them anywhere. And I've been on lots of forums. You know, I've not seen them anywhere.
Yeah.
So I think for staff, it's being conscious of where you're getting your information from and not like kind of jumping the gun and going for those knee-jerk reactions like, oh, they've used a kidney bean emoji, so now we've got to get on to prevent because they're an incel, and just being mindful of where they're getting their information from and doing their due diligence of stuff. And again, as Matt said, looking at these people as, yes, a perpetrator if they've done something wrong, but also looking at the behaviour behind that and kind of what's guiding that, because a lot of them it's going to be very low self-esteem and issues, and how can we build them back up so they're not going to behave like that in future.
Guys, thank you so much for your time this evening. It's been a really, really good conversation. So this will be available as a podcast. So if you don't already follow Teachers Talk Radio on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or anywhere where you get your podcasts, give us a follow, like and subscribe. And if you've missed some of this conversation, obviously, and you think it's worthwhile for someone else to listen to, then obviously share it on. Certainly was for me anyway. So thank you, Matt, and thank you, Tommy. In about 13 minutes, Ray and Leanne will be on TTR talking about what teachers shouldn't have to do, which I think will be fun. So that starts in about 13 minutes. So thanks everyone for tuning in, all the people who've stayed with us throughout, and I'll be back next week at the usual time. So thanks everyone, and good night.
Cheers, Tom. Appreciate it.
Yeah, night everyone.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.